one way I chose these three primaries is after seeing an Anders Zorn show years ago. The Zorn palette influenced me so much, I realized that it wasn't color that was the impact in his paintings. It was just the harmony. And the need for harmony is one of the most important elements to me. So therefore, rather than adding more color, I took more color out. And one of the ways I arrived at this as well is that I took numerous paintings, say 20 to 40 paintings that I'd done outdoors, sometimes more than that, I had taken, and I'd also looked at those that I've done with a limited palette, and I couldn't see a difference. I had a limited palette on a number of paintings and a large number of paints laid out for others for years, and I couldn't tell the difference between paintings. So then I realized, it really isn't a matter of how many colors I have on my palette. It's a matter of making them work together just to make a painting. So I ended up with these three primaries. I've got also these grays here. Now the grays that I've got, a few of these are tubed, and you can see those on your screen. But this dark accent, I do this, I mix the three primaries and I'll tube it up into a tube that is like this, and I'll actually put it in the back of the tubes, and I'll use them for numerous paintings. What these are is basically, these two, as you see, I'll buy these two, and these are just values to me. But these values in here are rather close, but one of them's warmer, one of them's bluer, one of them's more of a khaki type color. This is a little darker value. It's one to me that I'll use, and you'll see as I mix that these things will change. I'll change the temperature, I'll bend that value and use a piece of it on occasion. And other times if it's grayer, I'll start with gray. There's no sense in trying to mix gray if you've already got it, and bend it to a different temperature. This dark accent, I'll choose one. It's not one that I'll stick with. It's one that I'll modify to make the painting work. But what's real important to me is that the painting takes on a life of its own. But it's a matter of bending color to me versus seeing how many colors I can lay out on the palette. I need to get this thing to work together as a whole unit, as the painting has got to have harmony. So therefore I use grays when I need them versus trying to mix grays, because when you mix grays it just takes forever to get there. So I'll start with a gray and modify it. When I see a stronger color, I'll start with stronger color, maybe add a touch of gray to it. You'll see on occasion I'll do it that way. There's not a best way. I experiment in different ways. You'll see as we start these big paintings, one of the reasons for this video is to show exactly what I'll do from a small painting working into a large painting. So this process is going to happen right here, and you'll see that I'll mix these grays that I have here. They will be mixed prior to painting, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is I'm going to use the reference that I have here in front of me. This reference here is going to serve as a tool to a large painting. I'm going to change this and cool that and warm this, and I'll explain that to you as I go. But what I'll do is I'll mix pools of color. What I find most often in large paintings is if I can get large pools of color mixed, and I'm really close to the color and value, then I'm bending it and I'm moving it, and I'm not necessarily sticking with something that I know is going to be the answer. It's just close to the answer I might want. And what I'll do is bend it and modify it to make the painting. So when I mix these, what I've noticed numerous times with me is that when I finally found the color I wanted, I'd have to remix it, and man, I got it, and now I got to redo it again. So what I'll do is I'll get a large. To me, it's no different than picking a pastel. You're picking a color and a value, and you're working from that, and then you're bending it. So these grays that you'll see me start with are nothing but a jumping off point. Now I do this on occasion outdoors. Just to make me see a value, I'll go with the value first, then I'll find its color, and I'll stick with that, and then I'll bend it. Now, outdoors, I think the difference, one thing I want to say is this is a communicating process, this painting is. From small to large, the thing I've noticed most is that if you're not doing both, some outdoors and indoor work, you're not going to grow. And to grow, I think you'll see on the screen that there's numerous images I'll go through to arrive at a large painting. These studies, they'll serve as catalysts to ideas that I really want to communicate, and I'll finally arrive at that one thing that may be the thing that I think is worthy of a large painting, and it's something that really speaks to me in that area. And I'll do, for instance, in the top left screen, you'll see there's a painting there that it'll end up to be the major catalyst to the large painting. But the one on the right is the foreground and shadow, and the background and light in the same vicinity. Another one is the one below it is a 12 by 24, and it is it's a long rectangle of the same area without the water again. But I'm trying to find what I want to say. Again, this communicating process. What is it about this area that is intriguing to me, and how can I get that across to you? Well, in landscape painting, one of the things I've noticed most too is that you need to do numbers of paintings outdoors to grow. And everybody says, well, practice makes perfect. And I'm a firm believer in numerous paintings, but I also think that we've been lied to. And that meaning that just by merely doing numbers, we're going to grow. I think you have to have your knowledge base and your understanding there prior to, because if you don't understand how to break down a landscape a little bit, understand the 4 value planes, the 5 types of light, which I'll get to, if you don't understand those things, you're going to stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon. You won't know where to start. You're going to have to think in terms of relationships and how can you manage this thing that's going to go away in 20 minutes? Because that light, if you think you're finding yourself having a hard time with the slide of the Grand Canyon, just try to stand on the edge of it. And because that photo may take from here to there, it will seem small. You can look left to right and it's just immense, and then you can look down into it and there's even more yet. So, this painting outdoors doesn't just solve your problems. You have to have a knowledge base that's going to precede your execution. And if you don't, you're going to run into troubles. And they're the same ones I'll run into that you will run into. So what I'm going to address most of the time in this is the fact that I think landscape painting outdoors is a priority to learning, but I also think you have to bring them back in and assess what you're doing, and you have to bring them back into, and I would try to look at them through what I used to do is look at them through the eyes of the old painters. In other words, John Carlson used to talk about the 4 planes and the sky being the lightest, the ground being second, the slanted planes such as rocks and mountains being third, and the uprights of the trees being darkest. And I'd say, are my values reading? And if I looked at that, and he also said that he had and also a large statement you'll hear me say later as I go, but he talks about, must not train our eye to copy tone for tone, but to think of the bearing of such colors and harmonies upon the main idea of our picture. In other words, how much can the painting bear and still hold up under such a load? How many additional things can I add to it? How many rocks? How many extra trees? How many extra branches? Will the extra color that I'm trying to put in, will it still bear that? Will this painting bear that extra weight, that visual impact that I'm putting in there? It's easy to get extravagant. I found it's very hard to paint in reserve. And Carlson talks about painting with a good reserve versus, and a good reserve is going to be the real strength in the painting. It's not the extravagance that's going to carry the painting. So I guess when I start answering questions outdoors and indoors, when I'm assessing each painting, I go through these mental gymnastics of the old painters from the past, and they're more of the type of thing that if I don't have them, I really don't know how I'm assessing the painting. I have to go back to the simplest form. When I take the smaller studies and I look at them, I'll also say that the biggest brush and the brightest colors won't make an impression. If, in fact, he said, Carlson talked about too many highlights upon all forms or planes cause more paintings to come to grief than any other cause. And in saying that, he's saying that all of these highlights that we tend to add and all these accessories we try to add to the painting cause more problems than not. And so I'm going to do everything I can to restrain that. Again, he said reserve is strength and not, and it's interesting, Winston Churchill wrote about painting as a pastime. And when he talked about it, he said every good commander-in-chief has to have a good plan and a strong reserve. He understood that even in painting as a pastime, that a reserve was an important part of a painting. So I'll spend a lot of time on that. So to me, the reserve is these neutrals here. They're going to harmonize this painting, but these primaries are going to bend things the way I want them. I find that I don't feel a real need for color other than these 3. I see more reason to have red than any other color. If I were going to add another color, it'd probably be red. And the reason being is that Emil Gruppe talked about red as being the great modifier, and that there's more good reason to have red than any other color because of, we tend to paint outdoors too much on the blue and yellow side of things, and red can bend color from one. And the temperature of the green, the temperature of the color seems to be affected more by the red. The reason I've chosen permanent red medium is that it gets warm and it gets cool very easily. I like what it does. It's not a dark value. It gets nice in the warmth, and it stays very cool when you're wanting to keep it cool. So, well, I'll cover the palette again. The real quick, the ones that I buy are the Rembrandt. This is either a cold or a warm gray. It doesn't matter to me. One of them's warmer. This happens to be the cold. Again, it's a value to me. I'll bend it, and you'll see what I'll do with that as we go. These other grays that I've mixed here are this dark accent, this light one, and I may only bring those two with me if I travel somewhere. I've mixed a third one here that's a sort of a khaki tone, not for any other reason than I just happen to have it here. You'll realize I may lay out 4 or 5 on the next one. Who knows? Maybe 2. This here, the ones that I buy, again, they're Rembrandt cold gray or warm gray. And this is a Holbein. It's called Gray of Gray. It's very cool gray. The purpose, again, is it's very neutral, but it's cool. And I can get there fast. For instance, if I wanted to mix a little bit of the snow and I wanted just a piece of a neutral color, I'll just touch that. And if I want to warm it up, I'll touch the warm gray and that sort of thing. This is ultramarine blue from Utrecht. This is titanium white of Utrecht. This is cad yellow lemon from Utrecht. But one thing I've noticed with lemon is it changes dramatically from one company to the next. So I would not suggest a lot of lemons from most companies. I like a yellow that is very that doesn't really get real hot, or it doesn't get real cool and too greenish. So to me, I like their cad yellow lemon from Utrecht, but if I get a lemon from another company, I don't tend to like them as well. I would tend to say pick a cad yellow pale from another company, for instance. And the red, as I've discussed earlier, is that it's got more of it tends to get nice and warm when you want it and cool when you want it, and that's the primary reason. When I get into alizarin, I've had alizarin on my palette, I tend to see that if I get alizarin and ultramarine, those kind of mixtures, that my darks get a little too dark, and then it drops the whole painting down into another key. And to me, the keying in process, this initial lay-in, is so important. I want to be as accurate as I can. And the older painters I used to see washed in thin paintings of Sorolla when he started. You can see how accurate he was on his color and his value, of course, along with his drawing. But those values were on. His colors were modified. They weren't extravagant at all. He started out with something that was very neutral, but he could bend it all sorts of direction. And it's very important to me when I work from thin to thick, a traditional method. When I talk about bending a color, the question was, how do I bend color? What I'm suggesting is, if I'm about to mix a color, for instance, I may take a little gray here. If I'm going to mix the light of this snow, for instance, I would start with a gray, and that modifies it. It tones it down. It grays it off. And if it's tending to get a little cold, I might even put a little warmer gray in there. Then if it's getting a little hot, I may go straight to blue. I'm going to bend it. Now see, it has nothing to do with any of these other than I know I'm starting with a neutral base. There's not a best way of getting there. I'm going to get there one way or another. I had a friend who said, well, I don't have yellow ochre on this palette, and that's what I'm really missing. So I took a tube of yellow ochre and I squeezed out the paint and smashed it down so he didn't know which one it was, and had him leave the room. Then I mixed what I considered yellow ochre out of these, and I laid them right next to one another, and I came back in, I said, which one is yellow ochre? And he didn't know. My point is, do you need yellow ochre? You don't need it, because you're gonna change your color, but you can use it. There's nothing wrong with having an expanded palette. There's just not in my mind, there's not a need for more colors. There's more reason for reserve and simplify your palette. I get more confused the more colors you add. But when I do add a color, let's say I were to add, and I like and I've used it for years, Windsor green or a phthalo green of some sort, something that's really strong. I'll use very little of it, and I know why I want to use it. But I will not. I'll hold off till the end and say, okay, now I want to bump it a little bit, and I'll use that. But you won't see that in the end result. You won't say, wow, he's using phthalo green. So it's just barely used. If I were to step into another color and a value, I wouldn't know why. For instance, there's cobalt blue pale. One of my favorite colors is Holbein's cobalt blue pale. It's the most beautiful color. Everybody ought to have it just to squeeze it out and look at it. But it's expensive to use, and I've never used it straight anyway. So I have no reason to buy it anymore. It's amazing. I've had cobalt blue pale for years, and like I said, I've stood numerous paintings, old paintings against new paintings. You can't tell which ones I had cobalt blue pale in and which ones I didn't. So I'll tend to simplify everything by doing this. Great to travel because you're obviously not taking a boatload of colors. And in almost any country, you can find primaries. So alizarin, again, that's pretty popular color. I tend to stay away from it because if anything in the landscape, I want to be able to see into my shadows. And a lot of times I think that people, including myself, when I get into trouble, get my shadows too dark and I can't see into them. And sometimes your shadows can carry your color, and your light'll be washed out on occasion, and your whole painting can be carried just simply by the shadow. But it can still be that alizarin it just gets dirty in the darks, gets heavy. It doesn't get dirty depending on how you use it. I should disqualify that. Anyway, as far as palette goes, when I start mixing, you'll see a lot of varieties, a lot of things that I'll do you'll understand more why I use the grays. You won't see that there's a best way. What I can tell you is that there's not a best way in mixing a color. If I had to arrive at this color or that gray that I mixed, I'd arrive at it different every time. For instance, if I'm done painting and I've got numerous amounts of paint all over the palette, and I want to arrive at, say, this warm tone, I maybe just mix a bunch of this gray up, and I can see that it's starting to warm right now. But if it's a little cool and I want to get it warmer, obviously I'm going to add a little warmth to it. And this being warmer, if I want to get closer to this, I'm just gradually bending it. And I'll do this sort of thing, and I'll mix a bunch of it, and I'll put it in the back end of those tubes. And you can buy those empty tubes from some of these art stores. And then I'll just squeeze them down, and I'll bring them with me. For instance, if I were going to the Grand Canyon, let's say, notice how much red rock is there. I may take this same gray on my palette, warm it up just a touch. Say I end up with that, but a large tube of it. Then I'll put it in the back of the tube and take it with me. That's not going to get me anywhere, except it just gives me a base. I'll be bending that from then on. I may not even touch it during the painting. It's likely I would. For instance, if I were going to use that in this painting, this obviously is not going to get me there right here. So what I would do is bend it, and I'm going to gray it off a little. So I'm just grabbing some grays here. I've got to darken it a touch. Now I'm getting closer to what I want here. It's getting closer to, and when I'm outdoors, I do the exact same thing as I do indoors. I try to get the color and the value the way I want it, as close as I can get it at the time. And as I say, when I start doing this painting, you'll see me take a color and say, I want to modify this one. I want to change this one. I don't want this one quite so dark. I want to get a little more color in this transparent water. And as I'm doing those things, I'll tell you why I'm moving this study into another change when I'm doing it larger. But hopefully this explains a bit about the bending. Now, let's say I want to do the light of this tree. Obviously, I'm too light in value. So what I'll do is maybe start with a darker value, like this gray right here. This is that Rembrandt cold gray. I may even add a little dark accent that I've got mixed over here just to darken it a touch. I may add a little green to it, added blue and yellow, maybe red, a little bit more red to modify that green. And I'm going to arrive at something a little closer to that. And that's definitely not exactly what's here, but I'm not so concerned about getting perfect matching. I'm not going to get exact. I don't want to do everything like this study, or I wouldn't want to do it larger. My whole purpose in doing a larger painting is to see more. there's more in there that I can remember, that I can recall, because I've gone there numerous times. I've painted numerous snow scenes, and I know how much more reflected light there can be in here, how much more transparent this water is. And you can only get so much in a study. That light changes so quick. And so what I'll try to do is take all these concepts that I get in the field and try to bring them into something that I believe to be worthy of communicating. So, and to me, that is the process of painting, and that it's a communicating process again, and it's so important that I say what I want to say, and our temperament as painters is largely determined by how we deal with color, how we deal with edges, how many rocks we're going to put in the painting. For instance, where someone might expend on the color more in this painting, I may conserve on it. Where someone may add more green, I may add more red. Where someone may add more blue, I may modify it. There's not a best way, and each painting is different, takes on a life of its own, but to me, all this stuff outdoors is meant to arrange. You've got to come up with unequal distribution of shapes, of light and dark. For instance, I don't want this shape the same size as this shape. And I'm going to do a little square format when I do it larger. And as I'm doing this larger, I'm going to try to make some changes, some that I think are going to be contributing to. I'm choosing a square shape, one for difficulty, because I see this as still a longer painting, but I'm going to try to square this thing up and see what I can do with the design again. Again, it'll stretch me. It'll make me come up with a different design. But when I'm looking at this, I'm keeping a pretty simple pattern here. I'm going to try to watch how this line is broken, how many ways that I can break these lines in here. When I'm redesigning a painting, I'm always thinking design. I'm thinking unequal distribution of light and dark, and that's not my own. Edgar Payne talked about that. For instance, if you're going to have a majority of light and less shadow in a painting, or a majority of shadow and less light, and if I feel like it's half and half, I think it does get very uninteresting. So what I'll do is I'll move myself in that location a bit so that I can get that light to change enough that I don't get that half and half light. You'll hear me also refer to the 5 types of light, which I'll talk about either painting in light or in shadow, in a mid-tone, an accent, or reflected light. Now, I believe if you're not painting in one of the 5 and you don't know what you're painting, that you're on the back road to Beijing with no road signs. So here's the dark accent. You can see the darkest dark. It's being repeated throughout the painting. Try to find ways to carry it in there. The darkest dark and the lightest light are the accents. This water is either in light or it's in shadow. This is in shadow with reflected light in it. See, there's reflected light planes on that shadow. So I've got reflected light in here. I've got reflected light up in the snow, the warms and the cools in there. This is in shadow. This is in light. You can see the value is just slight, but there's a little temperature shift. So I know I'm painting light here and there's shadow here, and look how close valued those are. One's a little warmer, one's a little cooler. There are midtones within. I find that a lot of the midtones, you can't see as many of them in here. It's in this scale especially, but when you get larger, between the dark accent and the shadow itself, there'll be a midtones. There's a slight shift between the dark accent and the shadow itself, and there's a merging of those two. And I find those midtones and temperature changes, and they're very interesting. And in fact, John Carlson said anybody can paint a good value mass or two, but it's their juncture. It's how these things meet is the thing. They're the things that require thought in the painting, and they're also the things that they're most interesting to the artist. So the way these merge are very important. So there's light of the tree, real quick. There's light of the water. Am I painting light or shadow? There's shadow of the trees. There's shadow in the water, shadow in the rocks. And that's the sort of thing that I'll cover. There's accent. The accent is the lightest light or the darkest dark again. And the reflected lights, you can see reflections in the water, the reflected lights up in the snow. There are not as many reflected lights in the trees. It takes real thought, in my opinion, to try to subordinate areas in a painting to enhance more important ones. And so I'll purposely play down a lot of the reflected light I might see up in the top left corner, for instance, so that I can reserve the varieties for the area of interest a little bit more. Again, the idea is to subordinate and to play down certain areas to enhance some of the areas of interest. And it's not, and those areas to subordinate, I got to be honest, are some of the most difficult areas to paint. Sometimes the area of interest and these areas with the punch and that sort of thing are easier to paint. The hardest thing to do is to play everything else down so I can get you where I want to go, where I want to take you. With brushes, I tend to like the brights more. I'll probably like flats next year. But I think that mostly what I'll use in say this larger painting, I'll use this array of anywhere from 16 to say down to possible 4, very seldom will I use a 4. And if you're getting really excited and you like to use these, you could use these forever, or you could put them away forever and use them occasionally. I like the occasional side. This badger here, right here, I like because you can get a real nice sharp edge with it. I like that real flat feel, but they get a nice sharp edge, and you can get just as fine a line with this as you can the small. I don't have a problem with these. I use these quite a bit outdoors as I need them for fine lines, but you'll see I'll use 1 or 2 or 3, 4 strokes maybe with it, and I'll put it down because I'm just trying to find the varieties as I'm painting information. And as I'm getting information, it's real important that I get a piece of the accent. For instance, this the accent here in the tree. It's a light, and it has a lot of similarity to the light in these rocks right in here. And I try to find ways to repeat those things. Another thing I wanted to comment about is the studies. Basically, studying outdoors is vital to any growth, but I don't think it's any second to coming back indoors and working out some problems that you have, because you won't see them outdoors standing in front of the scene at times. But I also wanted to say that I'll do numerous studies to get a painting to work. I may get one. My average, I would guess, would be somewhere around 30 paintings before I have an idea to do something larger anyway. And sometimes it's up into the 60 mark. But on a traveling, for instance, I went to Ireland. I did somewhere around, in 3 weeks, did around 82 studies. And from 82 paintings, I think I did 1 or 2 larger. The reason I'm telling you that information is to say that a lot of these things are simply studies. Some of them turn out to be more than that. Of course, we want them all to work out well, but the studies themselves take on a life of their own. And I tend to be more of a studier outdoors than I am always a finished painter. If I get a good finished painting, great, but I'd much rather study the information, see what I can paint information, see if I can get the essence of what I think I'm seeing, so that when I do come back in and do this sort of thing and take these smaller ones up to larger ones, I can also have more information in my mind. For instance, I will say in my head, oh, I remember this was redder than that, or this was cooler, and this is darker, this was lighter. And by painting outdoors, numerous studies, you tend to accumulate a vocabulary of understanding of what goes on in a shadow when it's green during this type of light. You don't. It's not always the same, but you get understandings about it that will carry other paintings. It's not to say that you're solving any problems. It's going to be a formula. Definitely no formula there, but there's similarities that happen to green in a certain type of light. As we know, green's one of the tougher ones to handle. But when you're dealing with studies, I just wanted to say that you have to go through numerous paintings to have some successes, and don't feel as though they're all failure. You have to really, if you're really painting honestly what you think you're seeing, you're going to get some things that work, and occasionally you'll surprise yourself and the whole thing will work. But that's the painting process. I think if you'll never be satisfied, if you can get used to that sooner than later, I think you're going to be on an honest road to growth. If you're a little overexcited about everything you're doing, you may need to reassess if there's areas you might need to learn in a bit more. I know for me, every time I jump into color, if I'm into color, for instance, for a long period of time, trying to understand more about it, it'll shoot me right back into values, which I thought I understood more, and it'll shoot me right back into edges, and then right back into drawing and arrangement and composition. As soon as you get off on one subject, as you know, there's something else will get away from you. So it's a balancing act. The hardest part about painting to me is all the elements have to come together. And again, I want to reiterate that subordinating certain areas to enhance more important ones may be the most difficult part of painting, because it's easy to overpaint them, it's easy to underpaint them. As you may notice, I think, I don't know if you've noticed, but I think, 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 there are a few people think I'm over the top and say, why would you have such a piece of furniture to mix your paint on? And as far as I'm concerned, this is where I spend most of my time, so why not? I don't like messing with materials, so I want to have everything in place. I like to have real solid cleaning area. The drawers just hold numerous things. I've got a slide-out trash can on it. You know, this whole thing rolls. So to me, everything is functioning the way I wanted it. The way I want it. I don't want to walk around the studio. I want to keep that down to a minimum. The more I have right around me, the easier it is. I have enough things that get my attention, or distractions, I should say. I don't want more distractions. So I like a simple I like environment that everything's around me. This easel is great for me too. It goes up and down with counterweight. It's counterweighted, so you can push it up just slightly with your hand, or push it sideways to go side to side, and it expands up to handle large canvases. So I really, this is a necessity to me. It's a tool. It's something that it's not extravagant. It's something I'll stand in front of for years. So I've got two of them. I've got one in this studio and one in the other. The other area that I like to paint in looks out over the valley in the morning. I can pick up the paints and go do a study looking out the window. That other area too gets me out of the other main studio, just to give me varieties of light. I can look out there. If it's winter, for instance, I can still be painting and I don't have to freeze. But I can get out of this environment to get away from a large painting I may be working on and work on something else in that environment. That room is just different. It catches light different. The studio, for instance, the walls have more of a sage green color. It's one that I chose. It's not I don't like greens that get too pea green. I don't like greens that get too blue. I'd rather have it go on the blue side than get real pea green, though. Greens can get real scary. But I happen to like green to hang landscapes on, especially, or paintings in general. But I like a color that's simple. Even behind the easel, you'll notice that it's a pretty grayed green, and it helps me see the painting that's in front of me. So it's real important to me. Our environment, the environment that Karen and I live in, is conducive to aesthetics in our mind. It's a place where we want to be. And if I don't want to be in the studio, it takes everything in me to be in the studio anyway. That's why I'm a landscape painter. I love being out. But if I'm going to come in, I want to be here. So the environment we've chosen is one that we feel is comfortable for us. So. Okay, this again, I want to say that if I pre-mix colors, this isn't something I have to stick with. The decisions I'll make here are simply decisions based on another decision that I've made prior to and being out in the field. I'm going to try to match. It'll look like I'm trying to match and measure this very closely to what this is. There's a good reason why I'm doing that, is I want to say I want to be a little warmer than that or a little cooler than that. And as you know, paintings, just little slight shifts make a big difference in some paintings. So I'm going to do these mixtures right in here to get some values established and some color relationships established. And I want to say that the purpose, again, for spending my time, it takes a little time here. People say, I don't have that kind of patience. It's up to you. I know I spend probably more time down here with the brush remixing colors that if I'd spent a little bit more time prior to, I wouldn't run into that constant mixing either down in here. I think it all equals out in the end. But my point is if I can get more of this established here that I think I want up here, I'll spend more time looking up here and making my decisions based on this versus where did I get that again. And I'm looking and looking. And instead of spending all my time down again, I'm able to spend more time up here. So that's again why I mix pre-mixed pools of paint. And again, they're just meant to be jumping off points. If you don't like what you've got, and you think that that this color is too warm or too cool or too light or too dark, it's a good time to stop and remix the color if you need to and get plenty of it. So if you're working on a 60 by 60 like this large one is 60 by 60 inches. In fact, with the frame on it, that's just about above my head. And when you look at that painting, I'm trying to give you the scale of the large painting, but if you're looking at this large painting, when you when you have to remix every little piece of that 60 by 60 with a brush, it takes forever. So getting large pools of paint down here and getting it established prior to gives you an advantage to spend more time up on this big surface. So we're going to do a 30 by 36 here. This is a study done outdoors. So this 30 by 36 that I'm about to do, I'm going to start just pre-mixing some colors and values prior to, and I'll put up the white canvas just after this. I paint on numerous canvases. One of my favorite canvases is an Alkyd Prime surface. It's number 350. But this one happens to be glued to board. I've had some glued to gator board, and I stretch a lot of the real large stuff that I do. But anyhow, 350 is one I happen to love, and it's an Alkyd Prime. So I've gotten really particular about canvas. I really wish I wasn't so particular, but I am. But I'm going to go ahead and start mixing here, and I'm going to start with the light of the trees here. I'm looking at the light of the trees, and the one thing about trees, according to Carlson, is we put too many lights on these upright planes that should belong to the flat-lying plane, meaning that we should darken it just a bit more. We always tend to try to get impact with trees somehow by keep adding little highlights and leaves, and what we need to do is watch the value, make sure that value is dark enough. According to this painting, this is too gray. This that I've just mixed, so I'm going to add some more color to it. If I've got a huge pool here, I can just take a piece of this and add a little bit more color to it. I don't need to keep mixing into that one pool. Mix in a couple colors. One's a little warmer, one's a little greener. One's a little cooler green, one's a little warmer red, I should say. In these trees, I see the varieties in those. Again, I think I'm a bit light, so I'm going to darken it a little bit. Not just because of the study, but I'm trying to visualize the big painting still as I'm doing this. How am I going to change it versus what I'm seeing up there as a study? I think where people make a big mistake too, going larger, is they try to add more color because there's more surface and you got to get more impact. Actually, I find the opposite is true. I tend to back off the color just a touch more as I go larger. Okay, I'm going to just use this as a ballpark for the light of these trees. Now, trees tend to get darker and redder as they go in the background, as they drop off in the distance. So yellow will be one of the first to drop out, but they usually darken just a touch compared to the ones in front of them. If you observe that outdoors, look at the light of the trees and watch how they change. And I'm going to mix the shadow of the trees. You'll find when I do this, I'm going to mix the shadow of the tree. So I jumped right straight into a gray. That's not always popular. I could start from the three primaries, for instance, like this. And I can get to a neutral, maybe a little white in it. Some of you have heard if you mix more than two colors together, you're going to get mud, and I guess I paint muddy then. But mud's only mud by the colors next to, as you know. That color can dramatically change things when you get these just opposing colors next to one another that read. Now, you saw the gray. I went right back to my gray here. I pulled this over, went back to the gray, just modified it some. And it's a greener shadow. This is my shadow. You can see how far I have to go to a dark. You look at this dark accent right here next to it. In fact, look at just the raw blue next to it. You can see just the value difference. As I check that up there, I'm about right in the value. I'm going to keep a little more red in that shadow. I don't want it too hot because it's going to jump into the light, even though there is some warmth in it. And this is the shadow of the trees up front. The shadow in the background tends to just be a little cooler, so I'm going to add a little gray again. I'm going to cool it just a touch. at it as it compares to the study. Okay, I've got a few shades of green here. One is a little bluer, one is a little redder. This warmer one's going to be up front a little more. This is about in the middle ground. This is about in the back. I say about in the back. I'm saying right in here they tend to be cooler. There's a plane behind it of pine trees that's just slightly lighter in value. So rather than mixing a whole new color and value, I'm going to take a piece of all these. It's going to have something in common with those trees anyway and gray it off. And I'm going to watch the value of it. Again, value is real important. I've been hearing that enough. I don't need to say it too much. But it's vital to a painting working, isn't it? So this color in the background is this violety gray was how those trees look back in there compared to these trees when I was standing there. Also, there were some cools, there were some shadows. And the background trees are a little bit lighter. Now, these are shadows of the trees. Now, this gray violet right here is the light of the trees back in that background. And if you'll see that it's about the same value as the light of the trees in the foreground. So I'm carrying a value pattern and changing the color. And that's very important in a painting. How can I keep your eye away from this area but get enough varieties in it that it shows depth and everything? So the varieties here, I'll lay this one next to it so you can see it a little better. This is the background light of the trees. This is the foreground light of the trees. These are the shadows. These are the background shadows. They're a little cooler and bluer back in here. Now again, I can mix all of these from the three primaries without touching gray. There's not a right and wrong. You can have a broad palette, but make sure that when you have a broad palette and you have 25 colors or 15 or 6, however many you have to find ways to harmonize them. And you have to find a way to bring them all together. And that's where I think people struggle with landscape is they get all these isolated colors and they have no harmony with the colors around them. Okay, now some of the light of the snow here I'm going to mix real quick. Again, this time spent down here, to me, saves me a whole lot of time so I can look up. If I don't like something I'm seeing up here, I will adjust it. I'll come right down here and I'll adjust everything to make it read. And totally change the value, totally change the color, whatever it needs. You don't have to be sold on any one of these yet. In fact, it's a good idea not to be. As you start placing these colors and values next to one another, they either need to start having some sort of a read to you that's believable or not. And when you see that it's not believable, make that change. But once you finally make that change, stick with it. So at some point, you're going to have to make a decision. There isn't the best way. At some point, you have to make a decision and say, that's the colors or set of colors that best explains what I think I'm seeing. In the light of this snow, I've noticed I've got it a little bluer as it turns away from the light. The light being the hottest right in here, and it gets a bit redder. I don't know if you can pick that up on the screen. It's a bit redder in here, and it starts gradually cooling as it turns. And that's just typical of anything. It's got form that way. Sometimes when you look into these snowbanks, it's tough to detect because they're so light. They just glare at you. As I get larger, I'm going to get a little bit more of that spectrum in, hopefully. Right in here, I'm a little tighter. I'm going to get a little more of this warm yellow, red to blue. It's the light accent I'm mixing in the snow. I'm touching the gray right next to it, so it's modified a bit. Now I'm going to mix the shadow of the snow. You'll notice I didn't do a lot of comparing here. I went straight for the value, and I see that color is a little cooler, so I'm going to go a little cooler again. And I don't mind if I'm off on color just a touch. I can always adjust that. Boy, the value is really important now. Those of you that do portraits really understand the importance of a color shift to really make that form turn. Okay, the shadow of the snow, typically people will mix a color similar to this, meaning it's very cool, and I'm going to blue and red here, but I'm seeing that I'm awful strong. So compared to this, I'm going to modify it again. I'm going to neutralize it and gray it off a little. Again, the reserve is strength, and overstatement, according to Carlson, he said overstatement is weakness. He said no one cares to hear a singer's topmost notes when their voice is nigh on to breaking, because that art of conservation is what gives the painting its strength. So the masterpieces are done in subtlety, according to Carlson. He says when you're trying to just be extravagant for extravagance sake, you're going to just go out and buy all the different colors obtainable, and there's plenty of them. And they're expensive too, especially the ones that you never use. Keep a little cleaner cool in there this time. I'm going to try that. Now, for instance, this is a little cool, this pool right here. And so what I'm going to do is just warm it up with a bit of this fleshy tone, just a bit of it. Just warm it up a little bit. Again, I modified that color, just warmed it up. Instead of jumping into yellow and red, I just went to a neutral, but it's neutral warm. Want a little bit more, I'll warm it up again. Shortly, I'm going to make a few more colors and values down in here the way I was doing them outdoors. And then we're going to turn this to black and white so you can see the values and how close I'm trying to keep these value relationships. Even though some of them may have more color to them, you got to really watch that my values have structure. This is the dark accent that I'm going to use in the painting. I'm going to watch. I'm not necessarily going to use this one. I'm going to see where I'm at with this. I'm actually going to warm it a touch and maybe lighten it just a little bit more. That will be possibly the darkest dark. It should be the darkest dark. I may go a little darker, but if I would, it would only be, say, right there, which is going to be hardly noticeable. It is a lot more noticeable when it's surrounded by a shadow. But I don't know if you can tell. For instance, and I'm going to do this out of the screen here, but I'll put it right back in. This is how much darker I can go. That's how much more range I have for a dark accent. If you can see that, I don't know. It looks like it's a little tough to see on the screen. But I used to, when you paint an accent that dark outdoors, you got to really watch your shadows will drop too. And you should be able to see into these shadows. It definitely is something I've learned outdoors, is that there's a lot more in the shadow than you think. So and there's some brush and light. I've actually taken the green of the tree and warmed it a touch, and there's some of the willows that are in the snowbank there. Also, there's some ochre type weeds next to the snow. They seem to be slightly lighter in value. And being it's on the ground plane, it probably will be slightly lighter. Some people will keep it the same value. Some artists have done that through history just to keep more structure. Oftentimes you can break it just a little bit, meaning break this value here. I'm a little green and I'm also a little bit too dark, so I'm going to lighten it a touch. So this would be the grass. This growing on the side there. Warm it up a touch within that. Okay. Move these shadows over so I have a little room here. The light of the water, I'm going to get to, start off with a neutral gray again, throw it right in there. I'm just going to show you, for instance, if I took a piece of all this, it wouldn't matter. I'm still going to have to get a value. And so I'm going to take this right in here, get the value that I need. If I had to throw my dark accent to get the value darker, I will. The idea is it's neutral first to begin with. The water, I need to check its value, and I'm getting close, but I'm off on the color. And the color is extremely important in getting something that's not too flat out there too. You know, just everything gray on gray won't work either. You got to get warms and cools. Definitely needed to be looking at the differences. How warm is something compared to how the cools relate. Oftentimes people see things that are very warm. And you look out, I've seen numerous occasions outdoors when people will look at an area such as this, and they'll look at the willow and they'll say, wow, look how red that is. And because they look right into it and they think, look how hot it is. To try to get more light in it, they'll typically lighten the value instead of darken it, keeping it darker and just add more color to it. And that's similar to what we're doing here. This water, even though it doesn't read right now with this value, is very gray. If I add color to it, it'll come up and it'll read like it should. So you can get too gray on gray too. That can get very difficult to look at as well. But it's easier to be extravagant, I've found, than to reserve a touch. You need to learn to use the reserve more. I find in any paintings that I've observed through history that I've liked, you always felt like you could the ones I've liked personally, always feel like you could expend on color on occasion in there. It always left room for some of that. Never overboard. I'm going to cool this water just a bit as it goes back. I just threw a little of that warm color in there, warmed it up a touch. It's still cool compared to this one here. And the water as it comes forward, I'm going to warm it up a little more than the painting itself, than the study. So I'm going to get a little bit more warmth in this foreground. Not a lot. Now again, I'm mixing the light of the water here. The hard part about water is you can see into it, and you can see into the depths of it, and you can also see the surface. So again, you got to go with the colors and the values that you think you're seeing, and paint them what you think you're seeing, and stick with it. At some point, you're going to have to believe in what you're looking at and stick with that decision. If you change it too many times, it'll look very fractured and undecided. I'm comparing this not to make it exactly like the one I'm in front of. I'm actually warming it a touch, if you can see that. You'll see it as we compare the end result, I hope. Now at the end, I may tone it down again. We'll see. But again, it's not training your eye to copy tone for tone, but to think of the bearing of such colors and harmonies upon the main idea of your picture. When I look at this value I just mixed of the water right here, it's almost the same value as the trees as well, this value. So it's going to give it another thing in common with another part of the painting. And I didn't pull out of that tree color and value. I could possibly mix this, but and I may end up cooling this a bit more. We'll see. Now the value of the water in the middle right in here is going to be just a touch greener, but almost the same value again. These are the trees in shadow. I also need to mix these willows in here in shadow. The shadow of the snow. I'll warm it up just a touch more. I'm too hot, I'm going to cool it. A little light, I think, but we'll see. In that snow, there are a few darker planes, just slightly darker. Just slightly darker in there. Some spots. Now these rocks. Here's a more of a khaki type color that I've mixed and take a little warmth, gray. I'm going to darken the value a touch. It's a very neutral looking rock. So may as well start out that way. Feels just slightly lighter. I'm going to warm it just a little bit more so it's not too cool. Then the light side of that rock, I've got another neutral gray just sitting here. So light side of that rock, I'm going to lighten it a bit. Just keep a little warmth in it. It's a little too red, so I'm going to neutralize it again. See where I'm at there. Start somewhere in there. Okay, now the accents I'm seeing in the tree, the light accents of the tree are somewhere close to the light of this rock. So it'll be something in common. That's another way to carry that accent throughout. Mix some of the color of the grass in here. It's just slightly lighter. When we turn this to black and white, this here will be just slightly lighter than the trees in light, the brush in light. But look at these color shifts here. This being more of a violety gray, this being warmer, this being a little greener. Just a touch greener. In fact, if you want to, once in a while I'll mix a real strong green right in the middle of it, just to see it. And again, I'll not copy tone for tone, but think of the bearing of such colors and harmonies. The painting might be able to handle such colors and shifts. And we'll see as it progresses. But as we turn this to black and white, I want you to pay attention to all these color variations that are here. There's a greener, redder again, and then more of a violety gray. These are the shadows. This shadow of the willow, shadow of the trees, shadow of the trees, shadow of the trees in the distance, which is a little lighter in value, is getting almost to be the same value as the light in the foreground. Dark accent is right here. I'll bend that. I'll warm it or cool it as I need. One thing I haven't mixed yet, which I think I'll do, and it looks very close to the same value as this tree back here, is the shadow on the water. So I'm going to take a gray. Cool that a bit. Took quite a bit of gray on that one. Other times I won't. Again, you can mix out of the 3 primaries if you like. There's no need to do these grays. Outdoors, it saves me time, and indoors I find it gets me there a little quicker as well. But when I'm looking at this, I'm not just comparing it to the one I have there. I'm trying to imagine how it would look in the painting. So I'll adjust it to how I want it to look in the painting. How will this color hold up with the surrounding colors? Is it believable? There's an awful cool shadow in there. Cool off this green right here. Cleaner greens will also stay up front once in a while. They won't tend to jump out of the background. So this clean green. Now, when we turn this to black and white, we'll be able to see the variation there. Okay, you can see that this is actually picking up, this is the same value as this right in here. This is the light of the willows, light of the trees in the distance. These are the shadows of the trees. This is the shadow of the trees right in here. This is also a distant shadow in the trees. Distant shadows, redder, greener, a little bluer green. And this is a violety red that is going to be in the willows in the shadow. And this is very similar in color and in value. You also notice that this is just a little lighter, appears to be just a little lighter than the upright trees in light. And that's the way I saw the water versus this. And little different color changes. I've noticed that the rocks in light here are about the same value as the shadow in the snow. Now, I think I'm a little light in the snow, so I'm really comparing these things and I'm really watching them, making sure. So I'm going to adjust that value down just a little. I don't usually typically have the benefit of a video, although I used to take video footage of, or look at my painting in black and white through video just to see values on my painting itself. But this, by looking at black and white and looking at this as it compares to that rock, I think I'd be safer and smarter to keep that shadow just a touch darker. It's still almost the same value, isn't it? And darken it again. And this is the shadow in the snow. Now it is the same value as the light rock. So I'm getting similar values again. I try to think, how can I repeat values in color? Boy, when you're going to do some of this, it's definitely a color change. Light of the rock. This is the top part of that rock. This is the shadow in the snow. Snow is one of those rare things when you'll have a color shift and this value in the shadow might relate to a light in the landscape. Snow is a different value compared to other elements out there, so I'm keeping that in mind. You can't get away with that typically with other items in the landscape. Now this is where I'm going to keep the reference just right at the easel, which is typical of me for no other reason than I've done it for years. We've got a 30-36. This is a canvas mounted board, and we'll start the painting here soon. So I'll start with some thin washes, and just to try to block in the shapes that I want and to get this design started. It is just a little terpenoid and permanent red medium with a little every other color in it. Not on purpose. Now, when I'm thinking of this surface here, I'm looking for a variety of angle and line. For instance, a lot of times I'll notice that people will paint this line too, or not flat enough in the distance. And it needs to be flat enough to where it lays down at some point in the landscape. These rocks are here. There are numerous rocks in this. There are numerous rocks about the same size, if I remember right in there. But that won't look real. That'll be the first thing your eye will go to, is those finer lines, finer spots, so that you don't feel like you need to put all those in. If anything, reserve a little bit. Try to figure out how you can place them, or maybe make a group of them for variety. It doesn't mean you'll even keep them in. The idea here is you have to make a painting. Nobody's going to care where you put those rocks. One thing I'll try to do in most paintings is keep any strong angles. If there's a strong angle on this bank, usually when you look down at your feet, there are even stronger angles at your feet. You need to keep these stronger angles toward the bottom of your canvas. And they begin to get flatter as they go back. If there's any tilt in this one, it may be slight, but watch that you don't try to get the too drastic of a drop right in here, and especially try not to repeat them too much. If I get one here and one here the same, they'll be very repetitive and your eye will pick that up. So it's everything you can do to try to find all kinds of variety in a surface, even if it's a simple subject. Some of these darker passes I'm putting in, they're just reference points. For instance, in here, there's going to be a shadow where the snow will stay in shadow. It'll come right down into this dark. Nothing but a reference point for me. This angle right in here, if I want to make sure I get angle right there, I'll maybe darken it a little just so that I can see it. So this line comes into here, a little stronger angle, a little less, a little recession. Lines will do a lot for you as far as recession, the angle of them. This is just to remind me I want to break that line a little so that some of the grass or weeds will go over that line, soften it. Your eye can move back in here. Now I may want to open this up a little bit more. This is going to be where the snow, this over here will be a snow passage. I'm going to open that up and maybe drop this grass down just a touch more. I find that if anything's going to show through, a lot of the old painters used to get a lot of canvas showing through their painting. There's something about canvas you can't get with paint that'll illuminate and give you a little more light. And I find if anything's going to show through, if I'm going to have a transparent area, it's usually where these edges meet, where they merge. I'd much rather have a warmer tone than a cooler tone in there. Cools tend to die on you, but the warms will give it a little bit of life. And typically outdoors, there's a lot of cooler light, and this warmth in and around it is why I choose the warmer one to draw in with. Out of the three, it's just a better choice for me. If I were to out of the three primaries, violet is okay. It tends to get a little cold, but you'll see most of the time you won't see any of it. But if there are little pieces of light showing through the canvas, if you get up close, it'll be warmer rather than cooler. Another important thing to cover is that on occasion, in fact, more than one occasion, typically we'll use numerous studies of, say, face-lit snowbanks, and or I might have a pine trees that I like the way I handled them better. And if I have those, I'll put those in, and I'll put those up or put them around and stick them on the easel, or I have little slots back in here that I'll stick photographs in, and that'll just recall for me If for instance, I want to make sure that I am dealing with really soft, wispy trees, I'll look at a Steichen photograph and just have it sitting there to give me reference to, to let me know where I'm headed, what I want to communicate, and I want to make sure that I get those kind of things in. I'll have all that surrounding me. So, if I have a rock in a painting that I like the characteristic of the rock, nobody's really going to care if I paint the other rocks that I've had in there. So I'll maybe adjust, a little bit of the characteristic of one rock and the temperature of another tree in a face lit situation like this. And so I can have anywhere from 5 to 20 studies around me at one time. And that's, to me, the reference and the benefit of painting outdoors is you get all kinds of information, and that's where you can bring to a large surface. So I typically paint on white surface because I like the light of that canvas coming through on occasion. Just as soon as I said I'd never do it, I'll probably do it next time. But I've done it, like when I went to Ireland, I toned some of them warmer, just slightly. But I think one of the biggest problems people get into outdoors is they'll get these washes way too dark on the surface, and it too dark and warm, and then they can't get out of their darks. And I just like the canvas to show through as much as possible, so I seldom cover the whole thing. I like typically to keep my darker passages very thin, so I'm going to start with what I consider my dark accent. This will be the darkest dark I'll use, supposedly, in the painting. We'll see. It'll look very dark against a light surface like this, but I've got a long ways to a really dark, which I can show you later. I'll get a few of these in because I know myself well enough, and it's good to know whether you're a golfer or a painter, whatever, you have tendencies, and I tend to knock my darks out of painting, so I'll make sure I get them in, because I get in trouble when I lose them, and you don't get that sense of light without them. So that dark accent's important, but I don't try to go darker than I think I'll need. I try to go right on what I think I'm going to use. I'm going to find a way to repeat this, or to do this bank that just doesn't seem too repetitive and has a little bit more variety than the other painting. We'll see if that happens. It's just terpenoid in the cup, keeps it thinned out, work from thin to thick. You'll find within these trees there's some dark accents, and I'll just tend to put a few in right now. I'll eat a few of them up later to get rid of them. But I need to have some in there when I need them. And I don't like to get the darks real heavy. I don't seem to have that much light then. I don't carry as much light in the shadow if you give them real heavy in paint. I'm going to warm this accent up just a bit. Hard to pick up how slight it is, but it's enough your eye will pick it up. And I think outdoors and in, we'll look at something, we say, okay, that's warmer, and we go a lot warmer versus just a little warmer. And that's key to holding the painting together. Don't get too extravagant, too quick. You can see I'm going to spend less time down here. When I think I know what I want, I'm going to get it going as soon as I can without constant readjustment. So you can really pay attention to these lines and variety. It's easy enough to lose control of that. I'm painting shadow over the accent right now. There's just a little bit of this is getting light right in here though, so I need to make sure that I don't, but you can see the shadow that I'm putting in. Still there's a dark accent within it. It's very close valued, but there's a dark accent in there, and that'll give that thing some volume. But I don't want too much interest back in here because I'm going to be playing this. Now, as the painting progresses, that doesn't mean I won't go back to more of these darks. I'm just trying to get a few in. For instance, this brush right in here, I want to break this plane. I don't want this line to come sweeping down too straight here, so I'm going to break this plane with that brush just slightly, just to try to give myself a reminder of how many ways I need to break this line. Looking for variety. You can get a lot of varieties in a little painting, but you can't get, when you get larger, there's a lot of things you have to do to keep your variety going. Otherwise, you're going to get repetitive. It doesn't take as long to get repetitive, so you need to find varieties of ways to look for different shapes and sizes. The shadow of the trees in the background in here, I'm not going to stick with too long. A couple in. For no other reason than I want to compare this whole area. This is the area that I want to key in. When I find this information, I'll know more about what the rest of the painting's doing. And it'll dictate the rest of the painting as well, because this to me is the key area. So I'll move into the shadows on this tree, and again, I'm going to surround those dark accents and keep a few of them in there. And I don't have a lot of reference up around me. I'll typically look at a little bit of a variety of different trees, but I am looking at the reference and any information that I can glean from that. Varieties of shapes that I might have that I like. Varieties of how this color relates to this color and value. I want to make sure I don't, I can see, for instance, in a piece, once in a while I'll have a warmer tone that I like, but just because you like it in one spot doesn't mean the whole thing will read. You want to keep those varieties. Again, it's the variety that's going to give it the interest. And those are the sort of things that I'm learning from the study that I did outdoors. For instance, this tree I noticed was a little cooler green. So I'm going to go a little cooler with this one. And I may choose to make this one the redder tree. It doesn't matter, but with this particular painting, I'm going to stick with this one. Because my reds are down in here. There's just so many varieties of trees out there, some redder, some greener. I want to keep my reds more isolated into this area, so I don't need a pine tree to compete with it. Even though if these were real red pine trees and a red brush right underneath it, I may choose to make them a little greener pine trees so that there's a little variety there. That variety is where I want to keep you. That's toward the middle of the painting. I don't go for dead center, but I usually go for somewhere just off center of the painting that is going to keep your interest. I like orchestrating a painting around the middle, though. This is shadow compared to the dark accent within. You can see that dark accent in there now. A lot easier when surrounded by the shadow itself. I'll put a few more of those darks in. It's real easy to try to overpaint any one of these areas, and right now, when I'm outdoors, it's real important to me just to get this information as quickly as I can. Because when I get these relationships, I'll have a painting going in either the right direction or wrong real quick. It seems like I'm moving along rather quickly, but the way I'm keying this in is just like I would outdoors. I'm comparing colors and values constantly to one another. And as you see this progressing, you'll see I'll come quickly down into the snow and into the shadow of the snow, the light of the snow, the light of the water, and the shadow of the water. And from there, you'll start seeing the painting develop. And from there, I'll work out. And you can typically what I'll do is, if I want to gray off the trees behind it just a little bit so they recede just a little bit more, I'll cool and gray them just a slight bit. So they'll sit behind these trees up front. That's a real slight shift. Now within that, there's also a shadow. I'm watching my edges back here so I don't get them too hard. A little bit more of a dark accent back in there, not a lot, just enough to give those trees some volume. Now I'm painting shadow again. This is the light of the tree and this is shadow. You can see how close valued they are. It's real important I watch. Again, Carlson said anybody can paint a good value mass or two, but it's their juncture is the thing that requires thought. Too soft an edge and it won't work. Too hard an edge and your eye will go right to it. It's for keying in purposes. Again, if I'm outdoors, I'm looking for this warmth in this brush, and if it's there, I'm going to try to get it in. If that's not warm enough, I'll warm it again. If I don't like that, pull it out, and I'll try it again. I won't try to keep pushing paint over something that I don't like. It just gets grayer and muddier and darker. You don't seem to get the value you want. I'm going to lighten this value just slightly. Now that's a little too orange for me. Those willows were very red. So I'm going to keep a redder tone in. Actually, I'm going to go into a violety red rather than a real hot red. I'm painting the shadow of the snow as it compares to the dark accent as it compares to the light of the snow soon. couple places I didn't get any shadow in the study or very little. I'm going to put a couple of them back there so I have just a little, and repeat that in smaller shapes. Just like trees, the shapes can be smaller and that'll give you a little recession. I don't always move around just like that. I'm trying to cover this canvas so that, I'll typically do this outside. Indoors, I might slow down a little bit more. But I want to give you the idea that I need to get this thing to read so I know what I'm looking at. Oh. Cool this snow and gray just a bit on the back side here. It's too dark. The value just shifted too much for me. This is the light of the trees in the background.